Now's the time to buy cash flow positive properties. In 2022 and 2023, interest rates are increasing. So for me, buying cash flow opportunities means you can hold property for the long term and potentially also find a balance between that cash flow and growth that you're looking to achieve in a property portfolio. In this video, we're going to break down 3 ways you can obtain cash flow opportunities for the long term. Now, my name's Luke. I talk all things real estate renovating and financial freedom. Drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's just kick off with the basics of cash flow. So cash flow is essentially the difference between your income and your operating expenses on a property. Positive cash flow is where your income exceeds all of the operating expenses associated with your property. That includes interest, rates, water, any other bills and maintenance associated with the property. So if your income is greater than your expenses, you'd be considered to have a positive cash flow property. Obviously, negative cash flow is the opposite, so your income is less than your operating expenses. Now, positive cash flow is going to become a bigger and bigger draw card for investors over the next 2 to 3 years. As interest rates tend to increase, people will be looking for higher cash flow opportunities to make it easier to hold those properties, and so they don't have to worry about whether the property will be paying for itself or if they have to take money out of their own day job to cover the expenses on an investment. The first strategy we have when looking at cash flow is to buy a lower priced property. Typically, when you're buying a lower priced property, there'll be more building value and less land value. I'll give you an example. You've got an expensive home which will sell for $800,000 and you've got a cheaper home which will sell for $500,000. Both of the homes were built by the same builder and cost the same amount to build, $300,000 each. So if the homes are worth the exact same amount of money, what is the difference? That's the land value. So in the expensive home, the land value is $500,000, and in the cheap home, the land value is $200,000. When you've got higher home value relative to land value, typically you're going to have a higher yield on those properties. In comparison, if you had a large amount of land and a lot of property and not a lot of utilization in terms of the building on that land, then you usually have less rental yield. So the property that goes for $800K might yield at 3%, and the property that goes for $500K might yield at 5%. Now you can do that in Brisbane at the moment. There's affordable properties below $650,000 that will yield anywhere between 4 to 5.5%. You can also look to add value to these properties to boost the rental income by giving the property a lick of paint, paying trades to put in new kitchen bench tops, or refurbishing bathrooms. So number 1 is to look for properties which have an equilibrium of more building value than land value. The thing here is you're going to compromise on potential growth, because my belief is that land appreciates over time and buildings depreciate. And therefore, if your property that you're buying has more building value, which will give you better cash flow, you might compromise on the growth potential because you have less land value. Now, this leads me into option number 2, which is buying in regional locations. Because I talked about in option 1 that you can buy an affordable property in Brisbane or Greater Brisbane at this point in time, in Moreton Bay or Logan City Council or Redland Bay Council, you could also look to regional locations. Now, I might advocate for buying in a major capital city because there's jobs and infrastructure and future growth potential, but regional locations and regional hubs might present great opportunities as well. I've even bought in a large regional location in Coffs Harbour, and you can find more affordable properties in these locations and potentially higher rental yields. Again, you've got to work out your balance between capital growth and cash flow, but looking to a large regional location which has multiple industries, long-term growth potential, and cash flow that you're looking for could potentially present a great cash flow opportunity to buy in the next 1 to 2 years. The next one on my list is dual occupancy properties. Now, there's a whole different type of dual occupancy properties. The 3 we're going to talk about are duplexes. We've also got upstairs, downstairs dual occupancies and granny flats. Now, these properties are essentially where you have 2 dwellings on one location. These can be attached or detached. So a duplex or an upstairs downstairs dual occupancy are considered attached dwellings. So you'd have 2 leases in these cases, and you'd have one either side for a duplex, or upstairs and downstairs with a shared wall or a shared floor. You can also look at detached dwellings, which is the granny flat. These are also known as auxiliary units. You can do this in Logan City Council, for example, where you can have a house at the front and a granny flat on the back, and you're allowed to have 2 leases. So a separate lease for the front property and a separate lease for the back property. Now be wary that you can't do this in Brisbane City Council, for example. So you got to look at the specific council, look at the rules and regulations around duplexes, dual locks, and granny flats, and understand whether the council will allow you to legally let that to different parties or whether you're only allowed one lease on that property. The critical thing here as an investor and why this boosts cash flow is you're going to have greater rental income because you've got two incomes coming in. You've got a bit of diversity. So if you lose a tenant, you'll at least have another tenant helping you pay the mortgage. And you've also got one property. So you typically only have one title if you're not legally subdividing or strataing the property. And that means you're only paying one set of rates, one set of water bills, and you can on-charge expenses to the tenants as long as you have meters in place for both dwellings. So investors looking to boost cash flow might want to use these style of dual occupancy properties, duplexes, upstairs, downstairs properties, or granny flats to boost their cash flow over the next 2 years. Make sure you look at which councils you can do this in. I know Moreton Bay changed the rules a few years ago, so just be wary as to what you can and can't do. But this is a great way to get two incomes, boost your rent, and boost your cash flow. The last cash flow strategy on my list is obviously manufacturing value. Now, this is something I'm passionate about. I really love. If you've watched any of my YouTube videos, doing renovations to add value to properties and boost the rental yield is something that I personally enjoy doing. So Emily and I did this on the baby Queenslander, for example. The estimated rental yield was $350 a week. We went in, spent 8 weeks on the project, spent about $20,000 to $30,000, and we added $100 a week in terms of rental yield. So it went from $350 to $360 in terms of the estimate, and we ended up renting out the property for $450 a week. So taking an ugly duckling, renovating it, and adding value can give you capital growth, and it can also significantly boost the rental yield on a property. So doing a manufactured value project can give you that instant boost up front. Then you can also enjoy the rental yield from that property after you've done that hard work. So those are the strategies. Now let's talk a little bit before we close out about why cash flow is so important. You need cash flow to get more lending from the bank. If you're going to find interest rates are rising, your available cash to go towards your serviceability calculators will continue to diminish as your interest expenses increase. So going for cash flow properties could potentially allow you to access more lending from the banks and buy future investment properties. So serviceability is a critical factor as to why you need cash flow in your portfolio. Another reason you need the cash flow is so you don't feel trapped by your property portfolio. I'm an advocate for making sure you have balance in your portfolio. Ideally, you want to be at least neutrally to positively geared, so each property is paying for itself and you're not worried about having to cover those expenses from your day job income. You don't want your property portfolio to become a trap, which can happen to people who negatively geared. So if you're earning $200,000 a year and you're negatively geared by $50,000, if you stop going to work, then you're negative $50,000 cash flow each year. If you're in a positively geared situation and you quit your job, you know that the properties will continue to grow and pay for themselves and look after the debt. And you could go and do different jobs or take on different experiences and not have to worry about ensuring that you work to cover those operating expenses for your portfolio. The last critical point that I want to talk about as to why you should be looking at cash flow over the next few years is it helps you move towards your financial freedom. One of the old strategies that gurus and property investors used to talk about was equity harvesting and living off the equity and refinancing and dealing with the banks. Those strategies are becoming a thing of the past. You can still do it, but it's more complicated. These days, moving towards a debt reduction and a cash flow strategy is simple and works within the financial system that we play in at the moment. So over the long term, you're going to want financial freedom from your property portfolio and living off the cash flow from the rents, less the operating expenses, to help you go on holidays, retire, potentially start other business ventures. So making sure you have that strong cash flow coming through and working on building that cash flow over time can change your lifestyle and give you more choices. If you want to see another video about real estate renovating or financial freedom, click this video over here. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.